for 28 years. My father introduced me to Briar Glen society with a wink and a poison pill, and here she is, the affair child. It was the family joke that made everyone laugh except me. I spent my life shrinking to fit the accusation, apologizing for existing. But when a cheap DNA kit arrived in the mail, I learned the truth wasn't about infidelity. It was about a lie so expensive it cost me my entire identity. The crystal stems of the champagne flutes caught the light of the oversized chandelier, scattering tiny rainbows across the white tablecloths. It was the annual Briar Glen Foundation Gala, the kind of event where the charity was genuine, but the attendance was performative. The room smelled of expensive perfume, prime rib, and old money. I sat at table 4, keeping my posture rigid, my hands folded in my lap, trying to occupy as little space as possible. My father, Graham Ward, stood at the head of the table. He was 62 years old, tanned from his winters in St. Barthélemy, with silver hair that looked like it had been spun from actual currency. He held a glass of scotch, his other hand resting casually on the back of the chair belonging to the mayor's wife. He was charming. He was magnetic. He was telling the story again. I stared at the centerpiece, a spray of white lilies, and counted the petals. 1, 2, 3, 4, and speaking of wild oats, Graham said, his voice carrying that rich baritone boom that commanded boardrooms and country clubs alike. We all have our little surprises. Claire, there is my living reminder to always check the fine print on a marriage license. The table erupted in polite, lubricated laughter. It was a practice laugh. The sound of wealthy people acknowledging a joke they had heard a dozen times but were socially obligated to enjoy. Graham winked at me. It wasn't a conspiratorial wink. It was a claim of ownership. He was pointing out the flaw in the merchandise. Isn't that right, Claire, he asked. The affair child always keeps us on our toes. I forced the corners of my mouth up. It was a muscle reflex I had perfected by the time I was 12. Of course, Dad, I said. My voice was barely a whisper, swallowed by the clatter of silverware and the swell of the string quartet playing in the corner. The label hung in the air above me like a neon sign. The affair child. It was a shorthand way of saying I was half Graham, half mistake. It was a lie. Of course, or at least the specifics were. My mother, Elaine, had not stepped out on him. Graham had convinced everyone that I was the result of a brief separation, a period where they were on a break and things happened, but the subtext he projected was always darker, hinting that perhaps Elaine had strayed, or perhaps he had, but that he had been the benevolent saint to take me in regardless. The truth was irrelevant. The narrative was what mattered. In Briar Glen, perception was the only currency that held its value. After the applause died down and the conversation shifted to property taxes and sailboat moorings, I took a sip of water. My hand was trembling, just a little, just enough that the ice cubes chimed against the glass. The ride home was quiet. I drove my own car, a sensible sedan that looked like a smudge next to the gleaming luxury SUVs lining the valet stand. I met my mother in the driveway of the Ward estate. The house was a sprawling colonial revival, all white columns and black shutters, sitting on 4 acres of manicured hostility. Elaine Ward was waiting for me by the side door. She wrapped her cashmere shawl tighter around her shoulders, looking small despite her height. Claire, she said. I stopped, my keys digging into my palm. Good night, Mom. She reached out, her fingers brushing my arm. Her touch was light, tentative, like she was afraid I might shatter. He was just in high spirits, she said. You know how he gets when he has an audience. He thinks it is funny. It is just old family humor. It is not humor. Mom, I said, staring at the gravel. It is humiliation. He called me the affair child in front of the senator. Elaine sighed. The sound of a woman who had spent 30 years letting the air out of her own tires to avoid a bumpy ride. He does not mean it to be cruel, she said. It is his way of acknowledging the past without making it heavy. We have to be resilient. Claire, you know that. We survive by not making scenes. I looked at her. She was beautiful in a faded, watercolor way. She had spent her entire life smoothing over the rough edges of my father's personality, filling the cracks with her own dignity until there was nothing left of her but filler. "I am 33 years old," I said. "When do I get to stop being the punchline?" Elaine looked toward the house, where the lights in Graham's study were already glowing. "Just give it time," she whispered. "Please, Claire, for me, don't make it a thing." I nodded. I always nodded. I got back in my car and drove to my apartment on the other side of town. Away from the columns and the silence, I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed and replayed the laughter, wondering which part of me they were laughing at. The nose, the chin, the fact that I existed at all. The next morning, the office felt like a sanctuary. I worked as an archivist for a historical society, a job that suited me perfectly. I liked things that were documented, labeled, and put in their proper place. History didn't change its mind. History didn't make jokes at your expense. Marissa Klein, my coworker and the closest thing I had to a best friend, leaned against the doorframe of my office. She was holding 2 coffees and looking dangerous. I saw the Instagram stories. She said, I didn't look up from the stack of 19th century land deeds I was cataloging. "Which ones?" "The ones from the gala," Marissa said, placing a latte on my desk with a definitive thud. "The one where your dad is holding court, and the caption says, 'Classic Graham Ward humor.' Claire, he did it again. I took the coffee. It was just a joke." Marissa made a noise that sounded like a strangled cat. "It is not a joke. It is verbal abuse wrapped in a tuxedo. You are a grown woman. You have a master's degree. You own your own car. Why do you let him talk about you like you are a rescue dog he regrets adopting?" I finally looked at her. Marissa was fierce, loyal, and entirely intolerant of my family's dysfunction. "I am not being mistreated," I said, reciting the script I had written for myself years ago. "He paid for college. He helped with the down payment on the condo. I have never wanted for anything, except respect," Marissa countered, "and basic human decency. Look, Claire, you are not part of that family. I mean, you are, but they treat you like a garnish. You are the parsley on the side of their steak dinner." I flinched. The description was too accurate. "It is complicated." I said, "It is not." She said, "He keeps you at arm's length. Have you ever noticed that in the Christmas photos? You are always on the end every single year. Graham, Elaine, the new wife, the golden son, and then you, standing a foot apart, like you were photoshopped in at the last minute." "I know," I said quietly. "I know." "Marissa," she softened, seeing the look on my face, "I just want you to get mad. Claire, just once. I want you to flip a table." I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "We don't flip tables in Briar Glen. We just buy new tablecloths." My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a number I didn't recognize, but the caller ID said Briar Glen Medical Group. I frowned and answered, "This is Claire, Ms. Ward. This is Dr. Evans' office." My stomach did a small, cold flip. I had gone in for a routine physical 3 days ago. I was healthy. I ate kale. "I ran 3 miles a week. Is everything okay?" I asked. The nurse's voice was professional but brisk. "The doctor wanted to discuss your blood panel. Nothing catastrophic, so please do not panic, but we noticed some irregularities in your clotting factors and some red blood cell morphology that looks a bit distinct." "Distinct," I repeated. "Yes, we were looking through your file, and we realized we do not have a comprehensive family history on record for you, specifically regarding hereditary hematology." I held the phone tighter. "I don't know much about it. My father is healthy. My mother has low iron. I think," the nurse paused, "we would like you to come in for a follow-up, but in the meantime, it would be extremely helpful if you could get a detailed medical history from both parents, specifically looking for recessive traits. Sometimes these things skip a generation, but if we know what we are looking for, it saves a lot of testing." "Okay," I said. "I will ask." I hung up. The office was quiet. Dust motes danced in the shaft of sunlight hitting the floor. Medical history. It seemed like such a simple thing. Most people knew if their grandfather had heart disease or if their aunt had diabetes. I knew nothing. Whenever I asked Elaine about her side of the family, she got vague and misty-eyed about her childhood home in Vermont, but never gave specifics. Graham simply refused to discuss the past, claiming that looking backward was a waste of time for a man of vision. I opened my laptop. I wasn't going to ask them. I couldn't bear the thought of another conversation where I had to beg for scraps of information while Graham made jokes about my mysterious origins. I typed DNA test into the search bar. It wasn't an emotional decision. I told myself that firmly. It was practical. It was responsible. I needed to know if I was a carrier for something that could kill me. That was all. I selected the most comprehensive package available. Health plus Ancestry. I stared at the checkout screen. Standard shipping 5 to 7 business days. Expedited shipping 1 to 2 business days. I clicked expedited. I paid the extra $30. I felt a strange tightness in my chest, like I was buying a ticket for a train I wasn't sure I wanted to board. I wasn't looking for a new father. I wasn't looking for a scandal. I just wanted to know why my blood looked different under a microscope. 2 days later, on a Friday afternoon, my phone rang again. It was Graham. Claire, he said. No greeting, no preamble. Hello, Dad. We are having a meeting tomorrow. 11 o'clock. Be here. A meeting, I asked. Is everything okay? Estate updates, he said. Boring administrative nonsense. But my lawyer says we need signatures. Tessa is making brunch. Try to be on time. For once, I was never late. I was chronically early. But facts didn't matter to Graham. I will be there, I said. I hung up and looked at the kitchen counter. The DNA kit had arrived an hour ago. It sat there, a sleek white box wrapped in plastic. I hadn't opened it yet. I told myself I would do it Sunday night, when things were quiet. Saturday morning was gray and overcast. I drove to the Ward estate with a knot of anxiety in my stomach that felt like a clenched fist. The gate was open. I parked next to a silver Porsche that belonged to Tessa, Graham's second wife. Tessa was 10 years younger than Graham and 5 years older than me. She was sharp, strategic, and terrifyingly competent. She treated me with the polite distance one might afford a visiting distant cousin who had a tendency to break things. I entered the house. The foyer was vast, the black and white marble tiles shining like a chessboard. In the sunroom, Graham sat in his leather armchair. Tessa was pouring coffee from a silver carafe. Elaine wasn't there. Since the divorce 10 years ago, Elaine had been slowly erased from the house, though she still attended public functions to keep up appearances. "Claire," Tessa said, flashing a smile that showed perfectly veneered teeth. "You look tired. Are you taking care of your skin?" "I am fine." Tessa, "Hello, Dad?" Graham didn't look up from his iPad. "Sit down." I sat. The chair was low, forcing me to look up at them. It was a power dynamic furniture arrangement, and I knew it. "So," Graham said, finally setting the tablet down, "we are updating the trust structure. Tax laws are changing, and we need to move some assets around to protect the principal." He slid a thick document across the low coffee table. It was bound in blue paper. Tessa leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It is really just housekeeping. Claire, we want to make sure everything is streamlined. Simplifies future paperwork. You know how messy probate can be." I looked at the document. The title was Legal Jargon, Modification of Trust Beneficiaries and Waiver of Claim. I reached for it, but Graham's hand landed on top of the paper. "You do not need to read the boilerplate," he said. "It is standard. Just sign the back page." I pulled my hand back. I would like to read it. "Dad," Graham sighed, a long, exasperated sound that filled the room. "Claire, do not be tedious. It preserves your current stipend. It just clarifies the lineage of the estate properties. Clarifies how I asked." Tessa jumped in, her voice sugary sweet, but brittle. "It just ensures that the core assets, the house, the portfolio, stay within the direct biological line. For tax purposes, it really benefits everyone. Direct biological line." The phrase hung there. "So," I said slowly, If I sign this, I am agreeing that I am not part of the direct biological line. Graham looked at me, his eyes cold and flat. You are the affair child. Claire, we have always known that. This just formalizes the reality we have all been living with. You get your money, you get your security, but the legacy belongs to Ethan. Ethan was their son, my half-brother. The golden boy. I felt the blood drain from my face. It wasn't about the money. I didn't care about his money. It was the erasure. He was asking me to sign a document that legally declared me a stranger. I am not signing this. I said, not without a lawyer reading it. Graham's face didn't change. He didn't get red. He didn't shout. He just stared at me with a profound, disappointing boredom. You have always been difficult, he said. The words were spoken softly. They didn't sound like an insult. They sounded like a diagnosis. I stood up. My legs felt shaky. I am not being difficult. I said, I am being careful. Tessa's smile vanished. You are making a mistake. Claire, we are trying to help you. I walked out. I didn't look back. I heard Graham say something to Tessa, a low murmur of annoyance, like he had just discovered a stain on the rug. I made it to my car before I started hyperventilating. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, waiting for the world to stop spinning. A tap on the window made me jump. It was Elaine. She must have been in the garden or the guest cottage. She looked frantic. She motioned for me to roll down the window. Mom, I said. She shoved a small shoebox through the window. Onto the passenger seat. Take this, she whispered. What is it? Just take it, she said. I found it in the attic when I was clearing out some old boxes for Graham. I almost threw it away. But she looked over her shoulder toward the house. She was terrified. Elaine leaned in, her eyes wet. I am sorry. Claire, I am so sorry for everything. Mom, what is going on? She shook her head. Read the letter. Just don't tell him I gave it to you. Please. She turned and practically ran back toward the side garden. I drove home in a daze. When I got to my apartment, I carried the shoebox and the unopened DNA kit to the kitchen island. I opened the shoebox first. It smelled of lavender and old paper. Inside, there were scraps of a life I barely remembered. A lock of hair, a dried flower, and a hospital bracelet. I picked it up. It was tiny, plastic, and yellowing. Baby girl ward, Lakeview Memorial Hospital. Dr. H. Thorne. There was a photo. 2. A Polaroid of a newborn. Red-faced and squalling. Wrapped in a blanket with blue and pink stripes. And a letter. The envelope was sealed. But the glue had dried out, so it popped open with a gentle touch. It was addressed to Claire. In my mother's handwriting. The ink was faded. I unfolded it. It wasn't long. My dearest Claire, if you are reading this, I have finally found the courage to tell you. Or maybe I am gone, and it doesn't matter anymore. You need to know that the night you were born was the most frightening night of my life, not because of the pain, but because of the silence. There are things that happened at Lakeview that I have carried in my throat like a stone for 30 years. Your father, Graham, he isn't who you think he is. But more importantly, neither am I. I wanted to fight for you. Please believe that. I wanted to scream. But they told me it would ruin us. They told me I had no choice. You were loved. You were always loved. Even if we didn't know how to show it. Mom. I read the letter 3 times. Neither am I. They told me I had no choice. It didn't make sense. It sounded like the ramblings of a woman who had been gaslit for 3 decades. But the fear in the letter was palpable. It vibrated off the page. I looked at the hospital bracelet again. Lakeview Memorial. I had always been told I was born in Boston General. Why would I have a bracelet from a hospital in Vermont? I looked at the DNA kit sitting next to the box. The plastic wrapper glared under the kitchen lights. Discover your origins. I had ordered it to check for blood disorders. I had ordered it to be responsible. But now, staring at the cryptic letter and the bracelet that contradicted my own birth certificate, the motive shifted. The hollow feeling in my chest wasn't just sadness anymore. It was a vacuum, demanding to be filled. Graham wanted me to sign away my claim to the biological line. He called me difficult. He called me the affair child. I reached for the box. I tore the plastic off with my fingernails. I opened the tube. I wasn't doing this to prove them wrong. I wasn't doing this to win an argument or an inheritance. I was doing this because for 33 years, I had been walking on a floor that I thought was solid. And today, I realized I was falling through the air. I needed to know where the ground was. I needed to know what was real. I spat into the tube, sealed it, and put it in the return envelope. My hands weren't shaking anymore. I felt a strange, cold calm settling over me. I walked to the mailbox at the end of my driveway and dropped the envelope inside. The metal door clanged shut, a sound final and absolute. It was done. Now, all I had to do was wait. The email notification arrived on a Tuesday morning, right in the middle of a departmental meeting about archiving preservation techniques for 18th century vellum. My phone buzzed against the mahogany table, a single, sharp vibration that felt like a warning shot. Your results are ready. I stared at the screen. The room around me, the drone of the department head's voice, the smell of stale coffee, the dust motes dancing in the projector light seemed to recede into a gray blur. For 2 weeks, I had told myself that I was merely checking a box. I was a responsible adult gathering medical history. That was the script. But as I sat there, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, I knew I had been lying to myself. I wasn't looking for clotting factors. I was looking for permission to exist. I excused myself, citing a sudden migraine. It wasn't entirely a lie. The pressure behind my eyes was building, a physical manifestation of the dread I had carried since finding that hospital bracelet in my mother's shoebox. I sat in my car in the parking garage, the engine idling, the air conditioning blasting cold air onto my sweating palms. I opened the app. I tapped View Results. I expected to see the confirmation of the story I had been force-fed for 28 years. I expected to see Elaine Ward listed as parent and a blank space or a stranger listed as father. I was ready to be the affair child. I had made peace with being the affair child. It was a role I knew how to play, but the screen didn't show me that. The colorful pie chart spun and settled. I scrolled down to the DNA matches section. Parent/child, 0 matches. I blinked. That was correct. Graham wouldn't be there. Full sibling, 0 matches. Also correct. Ethan was my half-brother. Close family, 1 match. I froze. 1 match. A first cousin. An aunt. I clicked on the name. It wasn't a Ward. It wasn't a surname from my mother's family. The Delaney's, J. Harlan, predicted relationship grandparent, aunt/uncle, or half-sibling. Shared DNA. 25%. I sat back, the leather of the car seat creaking. Harlan, I had never heard the name in my life. I quickly toggled to the ancestry composition. If Elaine had an affair, I should still see matches from her side, her sisters, her cousins. The sprawling Irish Catholic clan she came from. I searched for the Delaney name. No matches found. I searched for my mother's maiden name. No matches found. My breath hitched. I scrolled through the list of second and third cousins. None of them were familiar. There were no Wards. There were no Delaneys. Instead, there was a cluster of strangers. Harlans, Millers, Rourkes, people centered in northern Vermont and New Hampshire. I wasn't just not Graham's daughter. I wasn't Elaine's daughter either. The implication hit me with the force of a physical blow. The world didn't just tilt. It inverted. If I wasn't Elaine's, then the affair story, the foundational trauma of my life, the reason for every cold shoulder and cruel joke was a lie. But it wasn't a lie to cover up infidelity. It was a lie to cover up the fact that I didn't belong in that house at all. I looked at the bracelet on my passenger seat. Lakeview Memorial. I tapped on the profile for J. Harlan. It was a private account. No photo, just a generic silhouette. Member since 2018. I composed a message. My fingers felt clumsy, like they belonged to someone else. Hello, my name is Claire Ward. We are showing as a close family match. I was born on November 12th, 1992. I am trying to understand my family history. Does the date or the location, Lakeview Memorial Hospital, mean anything to you? I hit send. Then I threw the phone onto the passenger seat as if it were radioactive. I didn't go back to work. I drove home and sat on my couch, staring at the wall. The silence in the apartment was deafening. I felt unmoored, like an astronaut whose tether had been cut. If I wasn't a ward, who was I? If Elaine wasn't my mother, then who was the woman who had dried my tears and taught me how to tie my shoes? Who was the woman who had looked me in the eye 3 days ago and told me she was sorry? The response came 4 hours later. J. Harlan. I am shaking reading this. Yes, the date means something. Can you talk? He included a phone number. I didn't hesitate. I dialed. The voice on the other end was male, older. It sounded rough, like it had been dragged over gravel. Hello, hi, I said. This is Claire. There was a long pause. I heard the sound of breathing, heavy and uneven. My name is John, the man said. John Harlan. I do not know how to say this. We took the test years ago. My wife and I. We were just looking for what I asked. For you, he whispered. Or someone like you. My grip on the phone tightened. What do you mean? John cleared his throat. It sounded painful. My brother Mark, his wife, Candace, they had a baby girl, November 12th, 1992, at Lakeview Memorial in Northbridge. I closed my eyes. The date, the hospital. What happened to her, I asked. She well? They brought a baby home. John said, a sweet girl, Lydia. But things were complicated. Candace always said something felt wrong. From the first night, she said the baby smelled different. She said she cried differently. Everyone told her it was postpartum depression. They told her she was crazy. He paused. But Candace insisted. She said there was a commotion that night at the hospital. An evacuation. Alarms. She said she lost sight of the bassinet for 20 minutes, and when the nurse brought the baby back... He stopped. What happened? John, I pressed. She loved Lydia. He said quickly, his voice defensive. We all love Lydia. She is family. But Candace went to her grave believing that the baby she brought home wasn't the one she birthed. We told her to let it go. We thought it was grief. But if you match me and you do not match your parents... The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. I have a hospital bracelet. I said, it says Lakeview Memorial, but my birth certificate says Boston General. My parents told me I was born in the city. John let out a sharp, ragged breath. Oh, God. John, I said, I need to know. Who are my parents? I could hear him moving on the other end. The rustle of fabric. I shouldn't be doing this, he stammered. Mark doesn't know. Lydia doesn't know. If this is true, it destroys everything. Please, I begged. You need to look at the records, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Go to the county. Get the long-form birth certificate. If you are who the test says you are, then someone committed a crime. Claire, this wasn't an accident. You don't get the wrong birth certificate by accident. Then the line went dead. I sat there for a long time, listening to the dial tone. Someone committed a crime. The next morning, I drove to the Vital Records office in the county seat where Briar Glen was located. It was a dour brick building that smelled of floor wax and bureaucracy. I approached the clerk, a woman with reading glasses on a chain and an expression of permanent fatigue. I need a certified copy of my long-form birth certificate. I said, Claire Elizabeth Ward, November 12th, 1992. She typed my name into the terminal. She frowned. She typed it again. That is odd, she muttered. What is it? She turned the screen slightly away from me. I have the record, she said. But I cannot print the standard copy. There is a flag on the file. A flag. It says sealed addendum. She said, I don't understand. What does that mean? It usually means there was a legal modification to the parentage shortly after birth, she explained, like an adoption or a surrogate arrangement. But in those cases, we usually have the amended certificate available. This one, the entire original file is sealed by court order. I can only give you the current abstract. She printed a sheet of paper. It listed Graham Ward and Elaine Ward as my parents. Place of birth, Boston General. But this isn't right, I said, pushing the paper back. I have proof I was at Lakeview Memorial in Vermont. The clerk looked at me with pity. I can only give you what is in the system. If there is a sealed addendum, that means a judge ordered the original details hidden. You would need a court order to unseal it. I walked out of the building with the useless piece of paper in my hand. Sealed addendum. That wasn't a clerical error. That was a lawyer's work. I called Elaine. I didn't give her a chance to prepare. As soon as she picked up, I said, "Mom, why is there a sealed addendum on my birth record?" There was a crash on the other end, the sound of something ceramic hitting the floor. "Mom." I dropped a mug. She stammered. Her voice was high, thin. "What are you talking about?" "Claire, I went to the clerk's office. I said, I tried to get my birth certificate. They said it is sealed. They said there was a legal modification. You told me I was born in Boston. You told me there were no secrets except the affair." "It is for privacy," she blurted out. The words came out too fast, too loud. It sounded like a line she had memorized 20 years ago and had been waiting to use. "Privacy from what I asked. From the public," she said. "Your father is a public figure. We wanted to protect you from the scrutiny of the situation. Because of the infidelity. We had the records sealed so journalists couldn't pry into who your biological mother was." I gripped the phone. "But you are my biological mother, aren't you?" "That is the story, that Dad had an affair, but you forgave him and raised me. Or Wade is the story, that you are the biological mother and he isn't. Which lie are we telling today, Claire?" "Stop it," she cried. "You are upsetting yourself. It is just paperwork. It doesn't mean anything. Please, just leave it alone. If you keep digging, you are going to hurt people. Who am I going to hurt?" "Mom. You or Dad." She hung up on me. That was the confirmation. She knew. She knew about the addendum. She knew about the privacy excuse, and she was terrified. I packed a bag. I threw in jeans, a sweater, my laptop, and the shoebox. I got in my car and pointed it north. Northbridge, Vermont, was a 4-hour drive. As I crossed the state line, the landscape shifted. The manicured lawns of Massachusetts gave way to dense pine forests and rocky hills. The wealth here was different, quieter, hidden down long dirt roads. Lakeview Memorial Hospital wasn't called Lakeview anymore. The sign at the entrance was sleek and blue Northbridge Health Systems, East Campus. The building itself was an architectural, mismatched quilt. The original structure was a brick block from the 1950s, but it had been swallowed by glass and steel additions. I parked and walked into the lobby. It smelled of antiseptic and floor polish, the universal scent of institutional medicine. I found the medical records department in the basement. Tucked behind the cafeteria, the waiting room was empty. I walked up to the glass partition. "Hi," I said to the young man at the computer. "I am trying to access my own birth records. I was born here in 1992. He looked bored. Name Claire Ward. He typed it in. The moment he hit enter, a red box popped up on his screen. I saw the reflection of it in the glass. He stiffened. "Ms. Ward," he asked. His voice suddenly alert. "Yes." He didn't look at me. He picked up the phone on his desk. "I need to get a supervisor to authorize this request. The system is showing that your physical file has been archived off-site." He dialed a 4-digit extension. He murmured something low into the receiver. "Yes, she is here, right now. Code blue on the file." "Okay." He hung up. "Please have a seat. Someone will be with you shortly." I didn't sit. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Code blue usually meant cardiac arrest, but in records, it meant a security breach. I stepped back from the window. A door opened down the hallway. An older woman in scrubs walked out. She was carrying a stack of files. She had gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and looked like she had seen everything human bodies could do to one another. She glanced at the waiting room. Her eyes landed on me. She stopped. Her face drained of color. She looked from me to the clerk, who was aggressively ignoring us. She walked past me, heading for the exit. As she passed, she didn't stop, but she slowed down. "You have her eyes," she whispered. I spun around. Excuse me? She kept walking. Wait, I called out. She pushed through the double doors leading to the parking lot. I followed her. The cool Vermont air hit my face. Please, I said, jogging to catch up. You know who I am. She stopped near a beat-up Honda Civic. She looked around the parking lot nervously. Her name tag read, Rourke, RN retired. She must have been volunteering or consulting. You shouldn't be here, she hissed. My name is Claire Ward. I said, but I don't think that is my real name. You recognized me. Who do I look like? She shook her head. I can't talk to you. They made us sign papers. They said they would take our pensions. Who made you sign the fixers? She said. The suits from Boston. She unlocked her car door. Then she paused. She looked at me, and I saw a deep, ancient guilt in her eyes. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a crumpled receipt. She scribbled something on the back with a pen. She shoved the paper into my hand. Don't do this alone, she said. The people who buried this, they didn't just use shovels. They used bulldozers. She got in her car and drove away before I could ask another question. I looked at the paper. It was a phone number and a name, Noah Pritchard. Attorney. I didn't wait for the supervisor. I knew what they would say. Records lost. Records destroyed in a flood. Check back in 6 months. I drove to the address on the paper. It was a small law office above a bakery in downtown Northbridge. Noah Pritchard was not what I expected. He was young, maybe 35, with messy hair and a desk buried under piles of paper. He looked like an overworked public defender, not a high-powered litigator. He looked up when I walked in. Can I help you? Patty Rourke sent me? I said. He stopped typing. He took his glasses off and cleaned them on his tie. Patty Rourke hasn't sent me a client in 10 years, he said. Not since the settlement. What settlement? He gestured to a chair. Sit down. You must be the Ward girl, or the Harlan girl, depending on which lie you believe. I sat. How do you know? Because Patty Rourke has been waiting for you to show up for 3 decades, he said. She calls me every year on November 12th, just to check if anyone has filed a discovery motion. I took a deep breath. I need my records. Noah, I need to know who I am. He leaned back. I can help you, he said, but I need you to understand something. We are not filing a lawsuit for damages. Not yet. If we sue now, they will bury us in paper for 10 years. You will run out of money before they run out of ink. So what do? We sue for access, he said. We treat it as a clerical error. We force them to produce the unredacted logbook from the maternity ward. We don't accuse them of swapping babies. We accuse them of bad record keeping. It is less threatening. It gets us in the door. He looked at me seriously. But Claire, listen to me. The truth. It is messy. It is not going to be a movie moment where everyone hugs and cries. If what Patty says is true, if you were swapped, then your entire life is a crime scene. And the people who raised you are either the victims or the perpetrators. Are you ready for that? I thought of Graham's jokes. I thought of Elaine's silence. I thought of the sealed addendum. I don't care about justice right now. I said, I just want clarity. Noah nodded. He pulled a fresh legal pad toward him. Okay, let's disturb the peace. I spent the night at a motel on the edge of town. I didn't sleep. I lay on the lumpy mattress and stared at the ceiling, listening to the trucks rumble by on the highway. The next morning, I drove back to Briar Glen. I needed to regroup. I needed to see Graham's face one more time before I blew his world apart. When I got to my apartment, I checked the mail. It was mostly bills and flyers. But at the bottom of the stack was a plain white envelope. There was no return address. The postmark was from Northbridge, Vermont. It had been mailed 2 days ago. I stood in my hallway and tore it open. There was a single sheet of paper inside. It was a photocopy of an old handwritten logbook. The header read, Lakeview Memorial, Maternity Ward Census, November 12, 1992. It was a list of names and times. 2:14 a.m., boy, Miller. 3:05 a.m., girl, Ward. 3:10 a.m., girl, Harlan. There were notes in the margins. Emergency gen failure, evac wing B. But what caught my eye, what made my blood run cold, was the pen marks. Someone had circled the entry for girl, Ward and girl, Harlan, and then drawn an arrow between them, a double-headed arrow, a switch, and next to the arrow, in frantic, jagged handwriting, a note. Incorrect bans applied during evac. Admin notified. Admin overruled. Do not correct. Do not correct. It wasn't a question anymore. It wasn't a suspicion. It was a documented fact. I held the paper, my hand trembling. I wasn't the affair child. I was the girl who was supposed to go home to a family named Harlan. But someone powerful, had decided that it was better to live a lie than to admit a mistake. I looked at the ID numbers next to the names. Ward 00452. Harlan 00453. We were just numbers to them. Interchangeable inventory. I walked into my kitchen and placed the paper next to the DNA kit wrapper. I wasn't just tired of not knowing what was real anymore. Now, I was angry, and for the first time in my life, I had the weapon I needed to fight back. The Red Booth Diner sat on the edge of the state highway, a place where the coffee was strong enough to strip paint, and the clientele consisted mostly of truckers and locals who wanted to be left alone. It was the perfect place for a conversation that never happened. I sat in the back booth, facing the door. My hands were wrapped around a ceramic mug that was chipped at the rim. Across from me, Patty Rourke shredded a paper napkin into tiny, snowy piles. She looked different out of her scrubs, in a floral blouse and a beige cardigan. She looked like a grandmother you might see at a library sale, not a woman holding the keys to a 30-year-old conspiracy. It was chaos, Patty said, her voice barely rising above the hum of the refrigerator unit behind the counter. You have to understand, Claire. It was not just a busy night, it was a nightmare. Tell me, I said. I had my phone recording in my bag. The screen dark, face down on the table. Noah had told me to get everything on tape, even if we couldn't use it in court yet. Patty took a shaky breath. It was November 12th, a Thursday. We were understaffed because of the flu going through the nursing rotation. Then the storm hit. It was not a blizzard, just heavy, wet snow that brought the lines down. The generator kicked in, but there was a surge. A breaker blew in the east wing. That was maternity. She looked up at me, her eyes watery and blue. The alarms started going off. Fire alarms, oxygen monitors. It was deafening. We had 12 babies in the nursery. The head nurse, Mrs. Gable. She shouted for us to evacuate to the surgical holding area in the main building. We had to move the bassinets. Fast. I leaned in. And that is when it happened. Patty nodded. We were running, literally running down the corridor. I had 2 bassinets, pushing them tandem. Another nurse had 2. In the confusion, in the hallway. One of the carts clipped a gurney. The bassinets jostled. The blankets were loose. We got them to the holding area. And it was dark. The emergency lights were dim. We were checking vitals, making sure everyone was breathing. She paused, her fingers trembling over the shredded napkin. We had to check the bands, the plastic ID bands, but 2 of them had slipped off. It happens sometimes with newborns if they lose water weight, or if the bands aren't cinched tight enough. We found 2 bands on the blankets. Which bands, I asked. My heart was hammering against my ribs. Ward and Harlan, she whispered. And what did you do? Patty closed her eyes. I went to get the charge nurse, but before I could find her, Doctor Thorne came in. He was the attending. He was stressed. He told us to just put them back on. He said, just match the weight. Don't make a federal case out of it. So you guessed. We didn't think we were guessing, Patty said, her voice pleading. They looked alike, both around 7 pounds, both girls, both with dark hair. We put the bands back on. We thought we were right, but an hour later, when the power came back and we moved them back to the nursery, I saw the logbook. I saw the admission notes. The Harlan baby had a birthmark on her heel. The Ward baby didn't, and I checked the baby labeled Harlan. Patty said, no birthmark. I checked the baby labeled Ward, a small strawberry mark on the left heel. I felt a phantom sensation on my own foot. I resisted the urge to look down. I didn't have a birthmark on my heel. I never had. You switched them, I said. You knew you switched them. I tried to fix it, Patty hissed, leaning across the table. I went to Mrs. Gable. I told her we needed to verify. I told her we needed to do blood types immediately before discharge. She went pale. She went into her office and made a call. I thought she was calling the parents. Who did she call? Administration? Patty said. And 20 minutes later, he showed up. Who? The fixer, she said. That is what we called him. He wasn't a doctor. He was a suit. He worked for the hospital's legal counsel. He came into the nursery, closed the blinds, and gathered the three of us who knew. He told us that the hospital was already facing a liability suit for the generator failure. He said if we admitted to swapping babies during an evacuation, the hospital would close, we would all lose our licenses, we would be sued into poverty. He said he would handle it. Handle it how? He said he would talk to the families. Patty said. He said he would explain there was a documentation irregularity, but that everything was fine. He made it sound like he was smoothing over paperwork, but he made us sign ND. As that night, he said if we ever spoke of it, we would be prosecuted for negligence. I stared at her. A documentation irregularity. Did he tell the parents the truth, I asked? Did he tell Graham Ward that he was taking home the wrong baby? Patty looked down at her coffee. I don't know what he told Mr. Ward, but I saw him talking to your mother, in her room. She was crying, and I saw him talking to a man in the hallway, an older man, distinguished. He looked like Mr. Ward, but older, my grandfather. I said, Howard Ward. He seemed angry. Patty said, not at the hospital, at the situation. He kept saying, this cannot get out. The name cannot be tainted. She reached out and touched my hand. Her skin was dry and paper-thin. I have lived with this for 33 years. Claire, every November 12th, I light a candle. I watch the birth announcements. I saw you grow up in the society pages. You looked happy. I told myself it was okay because you were rich. You were safe. I pulled my hand away. Safe isn't the same as real. Patty. I left money on the table for the coffee. I didn't drink mine. It tasted like ash. Noah Pritchard's office looked even more like a paper hurricane than it had the first time. He was pacing back and forth in front of a whiteboard covered in timelines. We have a response, he said as I walked in. From the hospital, he nodded and handed me a letter on thick, creamy stationery. Northbridge Health Systems, Office of General Counsel. Dear Mr. Pritchard, regarding your request for patient records dated November 12, 1992. Please be advised that Northbridge Health Systems complies with all state and federal retention guidelines. Records from the era in question were subject to a data migration event in 2004. While we continue to search our archives, we must inform you that any release of information involving third parties, specifically the other patients mentioned in your inquiry, would constitute a violation of HIPAA regulations and privacy statutes. Furthermore, the hospital categorically denies any allegations of administrative impropriety. I tossed the letter onto his desk. They are stalling. I said, they are doing more than stalling. Noah said, look at the language. Data migration event. Categorically denies. This isn't a records clerk writing this. This is a liability defense team. They know exactly what we are looking for. What do? We push harder, Noah said. We file a motion to compel. We use Patty's affidavit to convince a judge that there is probable cause to believe the records are being suppressed. Not just lost, but Claire, this is going to get ugly. As soon as we file that motion, it becomes public record. Your father is going to know. He already knows something is happening. I said, he is just waiting for me to make the first move. I need to talk to my mother, I added. Noah frowned. Be careful. If she signed something back then, she is legally exposed too. I don't care about the law. Noah, I care about the truth. I found Elaine in the greenhouse behind the main estate. It was her sanctuary, a glass box filled with orchids and ferns, the air thick and humid. She was repotting a cymbidium, her hands buried in dark, rich soil. She didn't hear me come in. I watched her for a moment. She looked peaceful here, away from the expectations of the main house. "Mom," I said. She jumped, dropping her trowel. It clattered against the terracotta. "Claire," she breathed, pressing a hand to her chest. "You startled me. I didn't know you were coming. I need to ask you something," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "And I need you to not run away." Elaine wiped her dirty hands on her apron. She looked at the door, as if calculating the distance to escape. "Is this about the DNA test?" she asked weakly. "Because I told you." "Claire, it is not about the DNA test. Mom, it is about the night I was born." I stepped closer. The smell of damp earth was overpowering. "I spoke to a nurse," I said, "Patty Rourke. She told me about the evacuation. She told me about the bands falling off." Elaine's face crumbled. She gripped the edge of the potting bench, her knuckles white. "She told me a man from legal came to see you." I continued, "He told you there was a problem. What did he say?" "Mom." "Exactly what did he say?" Elaine began to cry. It wasn't a sob. It was a silent, leaking misery. Tears tracked through the smudge of dirt on her cheek. "He said there had been a mix-up," she whispered. "He said they couldn't be 100% sure which baby was which, and then he said we had a choice," she said, her voice trembling. "He said we could demand tests. We could make a scene. We could wait days for blood work to come back from the state lab. Or we could take the baby who looked like a ward," she said. "He said you looked like Graham. He said the other baby didn't. He said if we just signed the papers, the documentation issue would be resolved. A clean solution. That is what he called it. And you just agreed," I asked, feeling a cold horror spreading through my chest. "You just picked the baby that matched the drapes." "It wasn't me," she cried out. "It was Howard, my grandfather." "He was there," Elaine said. "He had come up to see the heir. When the man told us about the uncertainty, Howard was furious. He took the man into the hallway. When he came back, he told me it was settled. He said, 'We are taking this one. She is a ward. The other one is not.' He told me that if I questioned it, if I cast doubt on the lineage, Graham would leave me. He said I would be out on the street with nothing." She looked at me, imploring. I was 22. "Claire, I was terrified. And when I held you, you felt like mine. I wanted you to be mine. So I believed them. I forced myself to believe them. And the sealed addendum, Howard's lawyers," she said, "they fixed the birth certificate so no one would ever know there was a question. They erased the uncertainty." I looked at her. I saw the fear that had ruled her life for 3 decades. She hadn't been a mother. She had been a hostage. "Does Dad know?" I asked. "Does Graham know I am not his?" Elaine wiped her eyes. "Graham believes what is convenient for Graham. He never asked. He just accepted Howard's decision. But later, when you didn't look like him, when you didn't act like him, he started with the jokes, the affair child. It was his way of punishing me for the uncertainty without ever admitting the truth." I turned to leave. I couldn't look at her anymore. "Claire, wait," she called out. "Be careful. Graham, he has people." "What people?" "He pays a firm." She said, "For years. I saw the statements once. Sablegate Consulting. He says it is for business intelligence, but I know it is for cleaning up messes. Sablegate Consulting." I sat in my car in the driveway and typed the name into my phone. A generic landing page appeared. Strategic Crisis Management. Reputation Defense. No team photos. No address. Just a P.O. box in Delaware. I logged into the shared family cloud account, the one Graham had forgotten I still had access to because he thought I was too difficult to understand technology. I searched the archived invoices for the estate trust. There it was. Sablegate Consulting. A monthly retainer of $5,000. Going back 10 years. And then, under miscellaneous expenses, a surge of payments starting 2 weeks ago, the day I ordered the DNA test. Expedited surveillance. Digital forensics. He knew. He had known the moment I started asking questions. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my cousin. "Sarah. Hey, Claire. Just checking in. Aunt Tessa called my mom and said you were having some sort of breakdown, something about being off your meds. We are worried. Do you need us to come get you? I stared at the screen. Off your meds. I wasn't on any meds. Another text. This time from my aunt. Claire. Darling, please don't harass your father. We know you are spiraling. Just come home and we can get you the help you need. He was doing it. He was painting me as unstable. He was delegitimizing me before I could even open my mouth. If I spoke up now, it wouldn't be a whistleblower revealing a crime. It would be a mentally ill daughter lashing out at her loving family. I blocked their numbers. Then, a different text came through. Ethan, my half-brother. We weren't close. He was the prince, 10 years younger than me, groomed to take over the empire. He usually only texted me on my birthday. Claire, I don't know what is going on. Dad is on a warpath. He just locked Mom out of the joint accounts. He told everyone you are dangerous. I hesitated, then typed back, I am not dangerous. Ethan, I am just telling the truth. 3 dots danced on the screen. Then I was in his office. He left his safe open. There is a file. Red tab. Labeled, Lakeview 1980s. I don't know why it says 80s if you were born in 92, but it was on top of the stack. I saw your name on a sticky note attached to it. Did you take it, I typed? No. He has cameras. I was scared. But Claire, whatever is in there. He checks it every night. I stared at the phone. Lakeview 1980s. Why the wrong decade? Unless the relationship between the wards and the hospital didn't start with me. Unless Howard Ward had a lever on that hospital long before I was born. 2 days later, Noah called me to his office. We have a development. He said, Did the judge grant the motion? Not exactly. Noah said, The hospital's lawyers called. They want a meeting, a settlement conference. We are not settling. I said, Just listen to the offer. Claire, we need to know what they are afraid of. The meeting was held in a conference room at a high-end hotel in downtown Briar Glen. Neutral ground. The hospital's lawyer was a woman named Ms. Vane. She wore a suit that cost more than my car and had a smile that didn't move her eyes. Ms. Ward, she said, sliding a folder across the polished mahogany table. Northbridge Health Systems sympathizes with your identity confusion. While we maintain that our records are accurate and complete, we understand that uncertainty can be distressing. Cut to the chase, I said. Ms. Vane didn't blink. We are prepared to offer you a compassionate care package to assist with counseling, legal fees, and any emotional distress you may be experiencing. How much, Noah asked. $2 million, she said. The room went silent. $2 million. That was admission of guilt money. That was we buried a body money. And in exchange, I asked, in exchange, you sign a comprehensive confidentiality agreement. Ms. Vane said smoothly, you agree to cease all inquiries regarding Lakeview Memorial. You agree to seal your own DNA results. And you agree to make no public statements regarding your parentage or the hospital's history. I laughed. It was a dry, jagged sound. You want to buy my name? I said. We want to buy your peace of mind. She corrected. I stood up. I leaned over the table. You are not offering me peace. You are offering me silence. You want me to agree that I don't exist, that I am just a liability line item on your spreadsheet. It is a generous offer. Ms. Ward. I am not a ward. I said, and I am not for sale. I walked out. Noah followed me, looking both terrified and exhilarated. They are scared. Claire, he said in the hallway, they wouldn't offer 7 figures if they just lost a file. They are hiding something criminal. We are going to court. Noah, I want that deposition. I drove home, my adrenaline crashing into exhaustion. I felt hollowed out. My family, the people I had spent Christmas with. The people whose approval I had craved were systematically erasing me. Graham was calling me crazy. Elaine was silenced by fear. And the hospital was trying to pay me to disappear. I walked into my kitchen and poured a glass of wine. I looked at the DNA kit wrapper still sitting on the counter. It felt like a lifetime ago that I had spat into that tube. My phone chimed. A notification from the DNA app. New DNA match found. I frowned. I wasn't expecting anything else. I had already found the Harlan connection. I unlocked the phone. Match name L. Harlan. Predicted relationship, half-sister. Shared DNA. 26%. I stared at the screen. L. Harlan. Lydia. The girl who went home with the Harlans. The girl who lived the life I was supposed to have. But wait, if we were swapped, if I was the Harlan baby and she was the Ward baby, we shouldn't be half-sisters. We should be strangers. We should share 0 DNA. If she was Graham and Elaine's biological child, and I was Mark and Candace's biological child, there is no overlap, unless Graham was her father, and also my father. No, I didn't match Graham. I sat down on the bar stool, my head spinning. Half-sister. That meant we shared one parent, just one, which meant the swap wasn't a simple swap. It wasn't just 2 babies switched in the dark. It meant that the families were connected before that night. It meant that one of our parents, either the Wards or the Harlans, had crossed the line long before the hospital lights went out. I stared at the name, L. Harlan. She was looking for me too, and unlike me, she might know why we were connected by blood, not just by a mistake in the dark. I pressed the button. Send message. The rabbit hole just got deeper, and for the first time, I was terrified of what was at the bottom. Dunfield, New Hampshire, was the kind of town that looked like it had been curated for a postcard, but felt like it was holding its breath. The main street was lined with brick storefronts and trees that were just beginning to surrender their leaves to the coming winter. I sat in a booth at the back of a bakery called The Daily Grind, my hands wrapped around a paper cup of tea that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. I was waiting for L. Harlan. Lydia. When the door opened, a bell chimed, sharp and cheerful. I looked up, and for a second, the air left my lungs. She didn't look like me. That was the first thing I noticed. I had dark hair and the sharp, angular features that I had always assumed came from some distant ancestor, because they certainly didn't come from Graham or Elaine. The woman walking toward me had soft, rounded cheeks, light brown hair that curled at the ends, and eyes the color of sea glass. She looked like Elaine. She looked more like Elaine than I ever had. She hesitated by the door, scanning the room. She wore a heavy knit sweater and jeans, clutching a purse like a shield. Our eyes met. There was no spark of recognition, just a heavy, shared gravity. She walked over and slid into the booth opposite me. "You must be Claire," she said. Her voice was lower than mine, raspy, as if she had been crying or maybe just didn't talk much. "I am," I said. "And you are Lydia." She nodded. She didn't offer to shake hands. It felt too formal for 2 people who had just found out they shared 26% of their DNA and a hospital nightmare. "I ordered a muffin," she said, gesturing vaguely at the counter. "I won't eat it. I just needed to buy something so they wouldn't kick me out. I am nervous. I am too," I admitted. Lydia looked at me, really looked at me, dissecting my face. "You look like my dad," she said quietly. "Mark. You have his nose. And the eyebrows. It is really weird." I felt a phantom itch on my face. Mark Harlan. The man I had spoken to on the phone. The man who had raised her. "And you," I said, forcing the words out. "You look like my mother. Elaine. You have her chin." Lydia flinched. She looked down at the table, tracing the grain of the wood with her fingernail. "I had a great childhood," she said. "I need you to know that. My parents, Mark and Candace, loved me. They never made me feel unwanted. But I always felt like the wrong puzzle piece." She whispered, "You know, like I was jammed into a picture where I didn't quite fit. I was loud, and they were quiet. I liked math, and they were artists. I used to joke that I was switched at birth." She laughed, a dry, brittle sound. "It isn't a joke, though, is it?" "No," I said. I pulled the photocopy of the logbook from my bag and slid it across the table. "It isn't a joke." Lydia stared at the paper. She read the names. Ward, Harlan. She saw the arrows, the circle, the note. "Do not correct." She went pale. "My mom." "Candace." she said, her voice trembling. She died 4 years ago. Ovarian cancer. Toward the end, she was on a lot of morphine. She used to talk about the hospital. I thought it was the drugs. She would grab my hand and say, "Lydia, promise me. Promise me you will never go near the Vermont hospital people." I felt a chill run down my spine. "She warned you." "She was terrified," Lydia said, not ashamed, terrified. She acted like if I went back there, something would come for me. She said, "They took what they wanted. Let them keep it. They took what they wanted." I looked at the logbook. The arrow pointed both ways, but the power dynamic only went one way. The wards were the power. The Harlans were the collateral damage. We compared the details. I showed her the picture of my hospital bracelet. Baby girl Ward. She showed me a photo on her phone of a keepsake box her father kept. Inside was a bracelet. Baby girl Harlan. The dates matched. The times matched. "But there is one thing I don't understand," Lydia said, tapping the screen of her phone where the DNA app was open. "The swap explains why I look like your mom, and you look like my dad. It explains the logbook, but the test says half-sister." I nodded slowly. I had been wrestling with that math for 48 hours. If we were just swapped, I said, we wouldn't be related. We would just be strangers in each other's cribs. "Right," Lydia said, "but 26% shared DNA means we share one parent." I leaned in. "I don't match Graham." I said, "I have 0 markers with the Ward side." Lydia frowned. "And I haven't tested against Mark yet. But if I am a Ward, if I am Elaine and Graham's biological child, then we shouldn't match." I finished. Unless what? Unless the connection isn't between the parents we know. I said, unless there is a third person involved, or unless our families were tangled up long before that night in 1992. Lydia rubbed her temples. "This is too much," she said. "I just wanted to know why I felt different. I didn't want a conspiracy. I have a fiancé. I have a life. I don't want to be part of a scandal. You are already part of it." "Lydia," I said gently, "we both are. We are the evidence they tried to bury." She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flash of anger in her eyes. It was a quiet, simmering heat. "I am not evidence," she said. "I am a person. And if someone stole my life, if someone decided I wasn't the right baby to take home, I want to look them in the eye and ask them why I wasn't good enough." We sat there for another hour, piecing together the fragments of 2 lives that had been inverted. By the time I left, the sun was setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the parking lot. I drove back to Massachusetts feeling heavier than I had when I arrived. I had found a sister, but I had lost the last shred of plausible deniability. This wasn't an accident. This was architecture. 2 days later, the invitation arrived. It wasn't a text or a phone call. It was a heavy cream card with gold foil lettering. "Graham Ward requests the pleasure of your company at an estate planning brunch. Sunday, 11 o'clock. It was a summons. I debated not going. My instinct was to barricade myself in my apartment with Noah Pritchard and file motions until the sky fell down. But Noah advised against it. "Go," he had said. "Let them think you are still in the fold. See what they put in front of you." So I went. The driveway was packed with luxury cars. My aunts and uncles were there. My cousins, the entire Ward clan, gathered like a parliament of well-dressed owls. I walked into the dining room. Graham was at the head of the table. Looking vital and expansive, he was wearing a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my first car. Elaine was seated to his right, looking pale and diminished. Tessa, the second wife, was buzzing around, directing the catering staff. Claire Graham boomed when he saw me. He stood up, opening his arms. The prodigal daughter returns. The room went quiet. All eyes were on me. They knew. In a family like this, gossip traveled faster than light. They knew I had been asking questions. They knew about the breakdown Graham had invented. I didn't hug him. I stood by my chair. "Hello, Dad?" He didn't falter. He just smiled that shark-like smile and gestured for me to sit. "We have a lot to get through," he said. "Wonderful smoked salmon today. Try the capers. The brunch was a masterclass in denial. People talked about golf handicaps and kitchen renovations. No one mentioned the DNA test. No one mentioned the hospital. It was a collective hallucination of normalcy. When the coffee was served, Graham tapped his spoon against his glass. The crystal rang out, sharp and clear. "Family," he said. "As you know, I have been working with legal to streamline the estate. We want to ensure that the Ward legacy is protected for generations to come," he signaled to Tessa, who began handing out thick folders to everyone at the table. "These are the new trust instruments." Graham continued. "They are very generous. They lock in your disbursements and protect the principal from external liabilities." I opened my folder. It was dense with legalese. I scanned the pages until I found the section titled Waiver of Claims. The beneficiary agrees to waive any and all claims, present or future, regarding lineage, parentage, or historical medical liability against the grantor or any associated entities. It was a gag order disguised as a gift. I looked up. Graham was watching me. His eyes were hard, unblinking. "Everyone just needs to sign the signature page," he said lightly. "Then we can break out the champagne." My cousin Sarah was already reaching for a pen. I closed the folder. The sound was soft, but in the silence of the room, it sounded like a gunshot. "I can't sign this." "Dad," I said. Graham's smile didn't waver, but the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "Don't be dramatic. Claire, it is standard language." "It isn't standard," I said, keeping my voice steady. "It specifically mentions lineage and medical liability. Why would an estate trust care about medical liability unless there was a medical liability to worry about?" Tessa laughed, a nervous, tinkling sound. "Oh, Claire, you are reading too much into it. It covers everything. Slip and falls, car accidents. Does it cover Lakeview Memorial?" I asked. The name hung in the air. Graham's face twitched. It was a micro-expression, gone in less than a second, a spasm of pure, unadulterated rage, but I saw it, and judging by the way my uncle shifted in his seat, he saw it too. Graham's mask slammed back into place, but it was tighter now, less human. "You are obsessed," he said, his voice dripping with pity. "We are all very worried about you. Claire, this fixation on the past, it is not healthy. We have tried to be patient. We have tried to support you through this episode. But bringing this nonsense to the dinner table, it is insulting to everyone here." He looked around the room, gathering allies. "She has been under a lot of stress." He told the room, confused, imagining things. I stood up. My legs were shaking, but I planted my feet. "I am not imagining the logbook. Graham, I am not imagining the fact that I have a sister named Lydia who looks exactly like Elaine. And I am not imagining the fact that you have been paying Sablegate Consulting $5,000 a month to keep a secret that is 33 years old." Graham slammed his hand on the table. The silverware jumped. Enough, he roared. "You are hysterical. You are embarrassing your mother. Look at her." He pointed at Elaine. She was staring at her plate, her shoulders hunched. "Tell her, Elaine," Graham commanded. "Tell her to stop this madness and sign the paper." Elaine looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed. She looked at Graham, then at me. She looked at the folder in front of her, the document that would buy her silence for another year. Then, she did something I had never seen her do in my entire life. She pushed the folder away. "I can't," she whispered. Graham froze. "Excuse me, I can't do it anymore." "Graham," she said, her voice gaining a fraction of strength. "I signed the papers in 1992. I signed the papers when you made me seal the records. I signed the papers when you divorced me, Elaine." Graham warned, his voice low and dangerous. She looked at me. "I am sorry. Claire," she said, "I am so sorry. They told me I had to. They told me." She stopped, choking on a sob. "They told you what?" "Mom," I asked gently. "They told me if I didn't take the baby they gave me, I would lose everything," she said. Howard said. He said the family needed a clean line, and when the mix-up happened, he decided which baby was which. He chose. The room was absolutely silent. No one breathed. The old family humor about the affair child had just evaporated, replaced by the cold, hard reality of a transaction involving human lives. Graham stood up. His face was purple. "Get out." He hissed at me. "Get out of my house." I looked at him. I realized then that I wasn't afraid of him anymore. He wasn't a giant. He was just a man who had spent a fortune building a fortress out of lies. And the mortar was finally crumbling. "I am leaving," I said, "but I am not signing." And neither is she. I walked over to Elaine. "Come with me." "Mom." She looked at Graham. She looked at the life she had clung to for so long. Then she shook her head slowly. I need a minute," she said. "Just go. Claire, please, before he—" She didn't finish the sentence. I turned and walked out. I didn't look back at the table. I didn't look back at the crystal or the salmon or the faces of my relatives who had watched me drown for 28 years and done nothing but hand me a towel. I walked to my car. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Claire." I spun around. It was Ethan, my half-brother. He was standing by the garage, looking over his shoulder. He looked terrified. "Ethan," I said, "go back inside. He will kill you if he sees you talking to me." Ethan shook his head. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small black flash drive. He pressed it into my hand. "Take it," he whispered. "What is it?" I copied the folder. He said, "The one from the safe." "Ethan, there is a letter," he said fast, "from the hospital's legal team, from 1992, and invoices." But Claire read the letter. "It talks about risk containment and identity continuity." He looked at the house. "He isn't just protecting the money, Claire. He is protecting himself. There is something else in there. Something about the other family. The Harlans. Ethan, come with me." I said, "I can't." He said, "If I leave, he will know. I have to play along. But you were right. You were always right." He hugged me. A quick, desperate squeeze. Then he ran back toward the kitchen entrance. I got in my car and drove. I didn't stop until I was 5 miles away. Pulled over in a church parking lot. I gripped the steering wheel, gasping for air. It wasn't a victory. It felt like an amputation. I had blown up the family. I had exposed the rot. But the pain wasn't triumphant. It was a quiet, sickening nausea that sat in the pit of my stomach. I looked at my face in the rearview mirror. Who was I? I wasn't Claire Ward. Claire Ward was a legal fiction created by a lawyer in a suit and a grandfather who wanted a clean line. I was nobody. I was a vacancy, a placeholder. I thought about Lydia. She had felt like the wrong puzzle piece. I felt like I wasn't even in the box. I drove to Noah Pritchard's office. It was Sunday, but I knew he would be there. He was eating takeout noodles and reading a law book that looked as heavy as a cinder block. He looked up when I walked in. I put the flash drive on his desk. Ethan stole the files. I said. Noah dropped his fork. He plugged the drive into his laptop. He clicked through the folders. His eyes widened. "Oh, this is good," he muttered. "This is very, very good." He opened a PDF. Lakeview Memorial Legal. Confidential Memorandum. He read it in silence. Then he looked up at me, his face grim. "Claire," he said, "this isn't just about a swap. What is it?" He turned the screen toward me. "Regarding the subject of identity continuity, it is the recommendation of this board that the identities of Infant A and Infant B remain as currently assigned. Despite the biological discrepancies noted in the post-event audit, to correct the placement now would invite catastrophic reputational damage to the Ward estate and expose the hospital to criminal negligence charges. Furthermore, the financial settlement agreed upon with the secondary family designated as the Harlan Party is contingent upon absolute silence. Financial settlement. The Harlans were paid." I said, "Mark and Candace took money." Noah scrolled down. "It looks like it," he said. "But look at the date on the payment schedule. It starts before they left the hospital." I felt the room spin. "Wait," I said. "If they were paid before they left, then they knew." Noah nodded slowly. It implies that at least one of the Harlans knew they were taking the wrong baby home. Claire. And they took the money to keep her. I thought of Lydia. I always felt like the wrong puzzle piece. And what about Graham? I asked. Noah clicked another file. Graham signed the authorization for the funds. He said, he paid them. He paid them to keep his biological daughter, Lydia, and let you stay. Why? I whispered. Why would he do that if he wanted a clean line? Why keep the wrong baby? Because, Noah said, pointing to a clause at the bottom of the page. The retention of infant A. Claire is necessary to satisfy the terms of the Howard Ward Trust regarding male line proximity. I stared at the words, male line proximity. He needed a baby. I realized. He needed a baby right then, that week, to secure his inheritance from Howard. If he admitted the swap, if he admitted the confusion, the trust would have been frozen. He needed a warm body in the bassinet to prove he was a father. So I was just a prop. I said, my voice sounded hollow. I was a placeholder for a bank account, and Lydia was collateral damage, Noah added. I sat down on the floor. I couldn't stand up anymore. The grief hit me then. Not for the father I lost, but for the life I never had. I grieved for the version of me that should have grown up in Dunfield, New Hampshire, with artists for parents. I grieved for the fact that my entire existence, my name, my school, my clothes, my memories was a fabrication paid for by a trust fund. I wasn't real. I was a receipt. My phone buzzed. It was an email notification. Service of process notification. Noah looked at his screen. He had gotten it too. He opened the email. His face fell. What is it? I asked. It is a court order, he said. From the Superior Court. He read it aloud. Emergency injunction granted. The release of any further records regarding Lakeview Memorial Maternity Ward is hereby stayed pending a hearing on privacy and third-party harm. He looked at me. They filed an injunction. Claire, they are claiming that releasing the truth would cause irreparable harm to innocent third parties. Who? I asked. Who is innocent in this? Noah took off his glasses. Lydia, he said. They are claiming that exposing the swap would destroy Lydia's life. They are using your sister as a human shield to protect their own skins. I stood up. The nausea was gone. The grief was still there. Cold and hard. But the anger was hotter. They don't care about Lydia. I said, they just want to bury the body again. I picked up the flash drive. They can lock the records. Noah, but they can't lock me up. And now I have the receipts. I walked to the window and looked out at the street. The world looked different now. It wasn't made of rules and families and truths. It was made of deals. But deals could be broken. I'm going to burn it down. Noah, I said quietly, I'm going to burn the whole thing down. Noah didn't argue. He just started typing. The courtroom smelled of floor wax and stale anxiety. It was a Tuesday in late October when Judge Holloway finally signed the order. It wasn't the sweeping victory Noah Pritchard had hoped for. We didn't get the full unsealing of the adoption records yet, but it was a wedge. The judge granted us limited discovery regarding the logistical and administrative records of the maternity ward for the week of November 12, 1992. It was enough to get us into the warehouse. The storage facility was located in an industrial park 10 miles south of Northbridge. It was a cavernous metal building filled with rows of bankers' boxes stacked 20 feet high. The air was cold and dry, designed to keep paper from rotting, but it felt more like a mausoleum than an archive. Noah and I stood at a folding table while a clerk in a forklift retrieved pallet 402. Here is the manifest, the clerk said, dropping a heavy box onto the table. Dust puffed up into the air. Maternity ward logbooks and shift reports, 1990 to 1995. I opened the lid. The files were color-coded. I found 1992. My hands were shaking as I pulled the folder out. It was thick, bound with a rubber band that had long since turned brittle and snapped when I touched it. I opened it. The pages were numbered. Page 41, page 42, then page 45. I stared at the gap. Pages 43 and 44 are missing. I said. Noah leaned in. He ran his finger along the binding. Look at the spine. Claire. I looked close. There were tiny, jagged tears of paper left in the glue. These pages hadn't fallen out because of age. They hadn't been lost in a fire. They had been ripped out. Someone came here, Noah said, his voice low. Someone physically removed the shift reports for the night of the storm. I turned the folder over. On the back, there was a checkout log. Most of the entries were faded stamps from the 90s, but there was one entry near the bottom, written in blue ballpoint pen, accessed January 14th, 2004. Auth legal/admin, 2004. That was the year the hospital changed ownership. That was the data migration event they had cited in their letter. They didn't migrate the data, I said. They sanitized it. We didn't just rely on the paper. We had Patty. 2 days later, Patty Rourke sat in the conference room of Noah's office. A court reporter sat in the corner, her fingers hovering over her machine. Patty looked small in the big leather chair, but her voice was steady. She was done being afraid. Please state your name for the record. Noah said, Patricia Ann Rourke. And were you employed at Lakeview Memorial Hospital on November 12th, 1992? I was a registered nurse in the maternity ward. Patty described the night in vivid detail. The storm, the flickering lights, the scream of the backup generators kicking in, the panic of moving 12 bassinets down a dark corridor while the fire alarms blared. She talked about the bands, the mix-up, the moment she realized the mistake, and when you reported this mistake to the administration. What happened? Noah asked. Patty took a sip of water. They shut us down, she said. Mr. Vanzetti from legal arrived within the hour, but he wasn't alone. Who was with him? There was another man, Patty said. Older, distinctive. He was wearing a trench coat over a suit. Even though it was 3 a.m, he looked expensive. Do you know who this man was? Patty looked at me across the table. Her eyes were sad. I saw him arguing with the administrator in the hallway. She said, he was furious. He kept pointing at the door to Mrs. Ward's room. I heard him say, I do not care about the biology. I care about the continuity. Fix it. And did you learn his name? Yes, Patty said. The administrator called him Mr. Ward, Mr. Howard Ward. I felt a cold shiver go through me. Howard, my grandfather, the patriarch, the man whose portrait hung in the library of the estate, staring down at us with eyes that looked like Graham's. He was in charge. Patty added, the hospital staff were terrified of him. He wasn't asking for a solution. He was dictating terms. I drove straight from Noah's office to the Ward estate. It was raining. A cold, miserable drizzle that stripped the last of the autumn color from the trees. I didn't call ahead. I had the gate code my birthday. Ironically, and I punched it in. The iron gate swung open. Graham's car was in the driveway. I let myself in. The house was quiet. Elaine was likely in the greenhouse or her rooms, avoiding him. I walked straight to the study. Graham was sitting at his desk, reviewing a stack of architectural drawings. He looked up when I entered. He didn't look surprised. He looked tired. You are trespassing. Claire, he said. I walked over to the desk and dropped the file Ethan had given me onto the blueprints. Then I dropped the copy of the invoices from the cloud account. Sablegate Consulting. I said, Graham looked at the papers. He didn't touch them. I know about the payments. Graham, I know about the retainer, and I know about the risk containment letter from 1992. He took off his reading glasses and folded them carefully. You are digging a hole. Claire, he said, you have no idea how deep it goes. I know Howard was at the hospital. I said, I have a sworn deposition from a nurse who placed him at the scene. He ordered the swap, didn't he? He told them to keep the baby switched. Graham sighed. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the rain. My father was a pragmatist, Graham said. He believed that perception was reality. If the world believed you were a ward, then you were a ward. But you knew, I said. My voice was rising. You knew I wasn't yours. Graham turned back to me. His face was a mask of cold indifference. I suspected. He said, From the beginning, you didn't look like us. You were too quiet, too internal. But by the time I had real doubts, the paperwork was signed, the trust was unlocked. The trust. I repeated. It always came back to the money. Howard's estate plan was very specific. Graham said, as if he were discussing the weather, the disbursement of the principal required a direct heir, a child born in wedlock. If I had come home without a baby, or if I had come home with a baby that was involved in a legal scandal, the trust would have been frozen. Howard would have cut me off. So you kept me to unlock the bank account, I said. I kept you to preserve the family, he corrected. And it worked. You had a good life, Claire. You went to private schools. You had ponies. You traveled. And you called me the affair child. I said, for 30 years. Why, if you knew it was a hospital mix-up? Why did you let me believe I was a bastard? Graham let out a short, harsh laugh. Because it was useful. Claire. Useful. It kept Elaine in line. He said, it made her feel guilty. It made her grateful that I stayed. And it kept you trying to please me. The affair child story gave me the upper hand. If I had admitted the truth that I was powerless against Howard, that I let him swap my child for a stranger just to get a payout, I would have looked weak. But as the forgiving husband raising another man's mistake, I looked like a saint. I stared at him. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. He had weaponized a lie not to protect me, but to protect his own ego. You are a monster. I whispered. No, Graham said. I am a survivor. And you would do well to remember that the only reason you have the resources to fight me is because I made those choices. I picked up the papers. I don't want your resources. Graham, I want my name. He smirked. You don't have a name, Claire. You are a clerical error. I found Elaine in the kitchen. She was drinking tea, staring into the dark garden. She looked up when I walked in, and she saw the look on my face. He told you, she said. It wasn't a question. He told me he did it for the money. I said, he told me Howard orchestrated it. Elaine wrapped her hands around the mug. There is something else, she said softly. What, 3 years after you were born? I couldn't stop thinking about it. The doubts were eating me alive. So I begged Howard. I told him I needed to know the truth, and he agreed to a private test. She said, this was 1995. DNA testing was new, expensive. He hired a private lab. He took a swab from you. He took a swab from Graham. I held my breath, and he never showed me the results. Elaine said, he called me into his office a week later. He burned a piece of paper in the fireplace right in front of me. He said, the matter is settled. She is a ward. If you ever ask again, I will ruin you. I will take her away, and I will make sure you never see a dime. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. I was weak. Claire, I know that. But he terrified me. He told me the results proved you were ours. He lied to my face, and I let him, because I was too afraid of the alternative. I went over and hugged her. She felt frail, like a bird that had forgotten how to fly. It is okay. Mom, I said, you don't have to be afraid of him anymore. He is dead, and Graham is just a man with a checkbook. The next day, Lydia and I drove to a storage facility in Manchester, New Hampshire. This was different from the hospital archive. This was personal. Lydia had the key to her mother's unit, Candace Harlan's storage. I haven't been here since she died, Lydia said as she unlocked the roll-up door. It is too hard. The unit was filled with the detritus of a life cut short. Paintings, boxes of clothes, and in the back, a stack of plastic bins labeled journals. Candace was a writer, Lydia said. She wrote everything down. We sat on the concrete floor, surrounded by dust motes, and started reading. Most of it was mundane, grocery lists, drafts of poems, thoughts on the weather. But then, in a notebook dated 1992, we found it. December 3rd, 1992. Mark thinks I'm crazy. He says I need to see a therapist. But I know the baby smells wrong. She doesn't latch the same way. Her cry is different. I called the hospital again. They hung up on me. I turned the page. December 10th, 1992. A man came to the house today. He didn't give his name. He said he represented the hospital's risk management team. He offered us a settlement for medical hardship. He said they knew about the confusion during the evacuation. He said they could fix it. Fix it. I looked at Lydia. Her face was pale. Read the next part. She whispered. December 12th, 1992. They came back, but the offer changed. The man said that the other family, the Wards, had declined the exchange. He said the Wards were powerful people. He said if we pursued this, if we tried to force a swap, they would drag us through court for 10 years. They would question my mental health. They would say I was an unfit mother. He said, "Take the money, Mrs. Harlan, raise the girl. She will have a good life. If you fight this, you will lose both children." Lydia slammed the notebook shut. "They threatened her," she said, her voice shaking. "They told her she would lose me if she tried to get you back, and the Wards declined the exchange." I said, "Howard declined it. He decided that since the paperwork was already done, it was cheaper to keep the wrong baby than to admit the mistake." We sat there in the silence of the storage unit, the weight of the conspiracy pressing down on us. It wasn't just negligence, it was kidnapping by bureaucracy. We drove to Lydia's childhood home. Mark Harlan still lived there. It was a modest, comfortable house with a porch swing and a garden that needed weeding. Mark was in the garage, working on a woodworking project. He looked up when we pulled in. He saw me, and he froze. The resemblance was undeniable. I had his dark eyes. I had his build. "Mr. Harlan," I said, "I am Claire." He put down his sandpaper. He wiped his hands on a rag. Slowly, methodically. "I knew this day would come," he said. His voice was heavy with resignation. "We found Candace's journals," Lydia said. She was crying. "Dad, did you take the money?" Mark slumped against the workbench. He looked suddenly very old. "We were broke." "Lyd," he said. "The hospital bills were piling up. Candace was sick after the delivery, and then this man shows up. He gives us an envelope, $10,000 in cash. He said it was for medical hardship. Did you know it was hush money?" I asked. Mark looked at me. "I suspected." He admitted, "But by then, we had Lydia. We loved her." And the man said, "He said the other family didn't want to switch back. He said you, Claire, were already legally theirs. He said if we fought it, they would destroy us." He walked over to Lydia and tried to touch her shoulder. She pulled away. "I thought I was protecting us," Mark said. "I thought I was keeping the family together. I put the money in a college fund for you. Lydia, I never spent a dime of it on myself. It doesn't matter." Lydia said, "You sold me. You let them keep your real daughter. And you took money to keep me quiet." "It wasn't like that," Mark pleaded. "It was exactly like that." I said, "I looked at this man, my father. He wasn't a villain like Graham. He was a weak man who had been crushed by a powerful one, but the result was the same. He had chosen the path of least resistance. I walked out of the garage. I couldn't be there anymore. I had two fathers, and neither of them had fought for me." The next morning, I was sitting in a coffee shop in Briar Glen, reviewing Noah's latest draft of the motion, when a man approached my table. He was young, maybe 30, with messy hair and a laptop bag slung over his shoulder. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. "Claire Ward?" he asked. I looked up. "Yes, I am Rowan Pike," he said. "I write for the Vermont Chronicle." I started to pack my things. "I am not doing interviews. I am not looking for an interview," he said. "I am looking for confirmation. I have been tracking a pattern of birth record addendums in Northbridge County for the last 6 months." I stopped. Pattern Rowan sat down, uninvited. 1992 was a weird year for Lakeview. He said, "They had 5 sealed birth records in November. That is statistically impossible for a rural hospital. Usually, you see 1 a year. Maybe 5. I asked. Rowan nodded. "And I found something else. The hospital ownership transfer in 2004. It wasn't a sale. It was a liquidation. The original corporation Lakeview Medical Trust dissolved. All the assets were transferred to Northbridge Systems. But the liability insurance policies, they were siloed into a shell company. Let me guess, I said. A shell company in Delaware. Rowan smiled. You have done your homework. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because I know who owns the shell company. Rowan said. It is a holding firm called G.H. Partners. G and H. I whispered. Graham and Howard. Graham Ward owns the insurance liability for the hospital, Rowan said, which means if the hospital gets sued for what happened in 1992, he is suing himself. He bought the debt to bury the evidence. I looked at this stranger. He had the missing piece. I won't give you a quote. Rowan. I said, I won't turn this into a sob story for your Sunday edition. That is fine, he said. I don't want a sob story. I want the financial trail. If you help me prove the ownership link, I can help you find the other 3 families. Other 3. You said there were 5 sealed records. I said, Rowan nodded. You and Lydia are just the ones we know about. What if there were more? I brought Rowan to Noah. We spent the next 3 days building the case. We weren't going to sue for damages. We weren't going to ask for millions of dollars. We were going to file for a declaratory judgment of parentage. It was a rare legal move. We were asking the court to simply state, as a matter of law, who my parents were, to correct the record, to strip the name Ward from my birth certificate and replace it with Harlan. It sounded simple, but for Graham, it was a nuclear option. If the court legally declared me a Harlan, the trust would be exposed for fraud. He would have to pay back every cent he had drawn from the direct heir distribution for the last 33 years. We filed the motion on a Friday. On Monday morning, Noah got a call. It is the hospital again, he said, and Graham's personal lawyer. They want a final meeting. We met at the same hotel. But this time, the energy was different. Ms. Vane looked tired. Graham wasn't there, but his attorney, a shark named Mr. Sterling, was Ms. Ward. Sterling began. We have reviewed your filing. It is aggressive. It is accurate. I said, we are prepared to offer a comprehensive settlement. He said. He slid a piece of paper across the table. I looked at the number, $5 million, and the terms I asked. Sterling cleared his throat. The hospital will agree to administratively correct your birth record. You will be listed as the biological child of Mark and Candace Harlan. I felt a surge of hope. That was what I wanted. But, Sterling continued, the correction will be sealed. It will not be public record, and you will sign a binding non-disclosure agreement. You will never speak of the swap, the Sablegate payments, or the Howard Ward Trust. You will take the money, take your new birth certificate, and walk away. I looked at the paper. They were offering me the truth, but only in the dark. They were willing to fix my identity, but only if I promised to keep it a secret. Why, I asked. Why is the secrecy so important? The money is already gone. Howard is dead. Because, Sterling said, leaning forward, if this becomes public, it opens the door for the others. The others. Rowan was right. There were other babies, other swaps, other mistakes that Howard Ward and his fixer had buried. If I signed, I would get my name back. I would be rich. I would be done. But if I signed, those other families would never know, and Lydia would still be the wrong puzzle piece in a story she couldn't explain. I looked at Noah. He gave me a slight nod. It was my choice. I picked up the pen. I held it over the paper. I thought about the word family. I thought about Graham calling me the affair child to protect his inheritance. I thought of Mark Harlan taking 10 grand to keep quiet. I thought of Elaine signing papers because she was terrified. Everyone had sold the truth for safety. Everyone had taken the deal. I looked at Sterling. No, I said. I dropped the pen. Ms. Ward, Sterling said, his voice sharpening. This is a final offer. If you refuse, we will tie this up in court until you are 50. You will get nothing. I stood up. I don't want your money. I said, and I don't want your private correction. I walked to the door. You fear the truth more than you fear a lawsuit. I said, That tells me everything I need to know. I walked out of the hotel. The air outside was crisp and cold. I pulled out my phone and called Rowan Pike. "Run it," I said. "Run what he asked." "Run the story," I said. "The shell company, the sealed records, the payments, all of it. Are you sure Rowan asked?" "Once it is out, you can't put it back in." "I know," I said. "That is the point." I hung up. I stood on the sidewalk, watching the traffic rush by. I wasn't a Ward. I wasn't fully a Harlan yet either. I was something new. I was the person who broke the seal. And for the first time in 33 years. The silence wasn't mine to carry. Rejection is a quiet thing. It does not always sound like a slamming door. Sometimes, it sounds like the soft click of a pen being capped without ever touching the paper. I looked at the settlement agreement. $5 million. It was enough money to disappear. I could move to Italy. I could buy a vineyard. I could forget that the name Ward was ever stamped on my birth certificate, but the price of the ticket was my voice. If I signed, I agreed to be a ghost. I agreed that the truth was a commodity that could be bought by a shell company in Delaware. I pushed the paper back across the polished table. "No," I said. "Mr. Sterling, the shark in the three-piece suit," blinked. He looked at the paper, then at me, as if I had just spoken in a language he didn't understand. "Ms. Ward," he said slowly, "I do not think you understand the exposure here. If you walk away from this, you get nothing. The hospital will bury you in motions. You will be 40 years old before you see the inside of a courtroom." I stood up. I picked up my bag. "I don't want the money. Mr. Sterling, I want the record." I walked out of the hotel conference room and into the cold, bright afternoon. My hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from the adrenaline of burning a bridge while I was still standing on it. Noah Pritchard was waiting for me in his car. When I told him, he didn't cheer. He just nodded, looking grim. "You know what this means, Claire," he said as we merged onto the highway. "It means we fight." I said, "It means we might win the battle and lose the war." He corrected, "Winning a court case doesn't make you a family. It doesn't make Graham love you. It doesn't make the last 30 years vanish. Sometimes, the truth is just a pile of bricks. It is heavy, and it doesn't build anything unless you have mortar. I don't need a family." "Noah," I said, staring out the window, "I just need to know that I am not crazy." The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. Judge Holloway, a stern woman with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, presided over the courtroom. It wasn't a criminal trial. There was no jury. It was a hearing on our motion to unseal. The hospital's lawyers argued that unsealing the records would violate the privacy of third parties. They used words like collateral damage and reputational harm. They painted me as a disgruntled daughter looking for a payday. Then Noah called Patty Rourke. Patty took the stand. She looked older than she had in the diner. Frail but determined. She told the story again. The storm. The dark hallway. The bands slipping off the small, wriggling wrists. And then Noah introduced the archive logs, the ones with the missing pages. "Your Honor," Noah said, holding up the folder, "we have testimony of a mix-up. We have a missing logbook from the exact night in question, and we have a pattern of sealed birth records from that specific week. This is not a privacy issue. This is a concealment of evidence regarding the identity of two human beings." The hospital's lawyer stood up. "Objection. Conjecture. Overruled," Judge Holloway said. She looked at the defense table. "If there is nothing to hide, then the unsealing of the administrative addendum should not be a problem. If it was a simple clerical error, let the record show it." She banged the gavel. "The order to unseal is granted." The document arrived 48 hours later. It wasn't just a birth certificate. It was a file labeled sensitive/risk management/Ward Harlan. Noah called me to his office. He didn't say anything when I walked in. He just pointed to the document on his desk. I sat down and read it. It wasn't a correction. It was a contract. Identity Continuity Agreement. Dated November 14th, 1992. Parties: the Lakeview Memorial Administration. Howard Ward, representing the Ward estate, and Mark Harlan. I read the preamble, and the air left the room. Whereas a discrepancy regarding infant identification was noted on November 13, 1992, and whereas the immediate rectification of said discrepancy would result in significant legal and financial instability for the primary party ward, it is hereby agreed that the current custodial assignments shall remain permanent. I looked up at Noah. Custodial assignments. I whispered. They treated us like assets, like furniture. Keep reading, Noah said. Look at paragraph 4. Paragraph 4. Rationale for continuity. The primary party. Howard Ward asserts that the initiation of the Ward Family Trust distribution has already been triggered by the birth registration of Claire Ward. To retract this registration and initiate a biological exchange would require a suspension of trust disbursements and a legal inquiry into the legitimacy of the succession. Therefore, to preserve the financial continuity of the estate, the infant currently in possession of the Ward family shall retain the legal identity of Claire Ward, regardless of biological markers. I dropped the paper. He knew. I said, my voice was flat, dead. Howard knew? It wasn't that he wanted to keep me because he loved me. And it wasn't that he wanted to keep me because he hated the Harlans. He kept me because the paperwork was already filed. He had already sent the birth certificate to the bank. The trust fund, the millions of dollars that sustained the Ward empire, had started flowing the moment I was registered. If he admitted the mistake, if he swapped me back for Lydia, he would have had to pause the money. He would have had to explain to the trustees that there was an error. He would have looked incompetent. So he doubled down. He chose the paperwork over the blood. He didn't care about the right bloodline. I realized with a sick jolt. He cared about the registered bloodline. He was so arrogant that he believed his signature on a document was more powerful than biology. He decided I was a Ward because he said I was a Ward, and that was enough for the bank. And Graham? I asked. Noah pointed to the signature line at the bottom. There was Howard's sprawling signature, Mark Harlan's shaky, small signature, and there, as a witness, Graham Ward. He was there. I said, he signed it. He knew the whole time. Noah said, he knew you weren't his. He knew exactly who you were. You were the placeholder that kept the checks clearing. And the affair child story, Noah took off his glasses. That was the genius of it. Claire, if he admitted you were swapped, he looks like a fraud who tricked a trust fund. But if he claims you are his illegitimate child, he is just a man with a vice. The affair story protected the money. It gave him a reason for why you didn't look like Elaine, without ever admitting the fraud. I felt a scream building in my chest. Hot and corrosive. He tortured me for 30 years. I said, he made me feel like dirt. He made me feel like I was a sin. And he did it to cover up a bank transfer. I didn't call Graham. I went to the house. It was late, almost 9 o'clock. The lights in the library were on. I walked past the housekeeper, who tried to stop me. I pushed open the double oak doors. Graham was drinking scotch. He looked up. He saw the file in my hand. He didn't panic. He just took a sip of his drink. So, he said, you found it. I threw the file onto his desk. It slid across the mahogany and knocked over a crystal coaster. You signed it. I said, you signed away your own daughter. You signed away me. Graham set his glass down. It was a different time. Claire, Howard. He was a force of nature. You didn't say no to Howard. Don't you dare. I said, stepping closer. Don't you dare play the victim. You were a grown man. You were 30 years old. I was a dependent, Graham shouted, his composure finally cracking. I had nothing, the house, the cars, the lifestyle, it was all Howard's. If I had fought him on the swap, he would have cut me off. He told me, you can have the money and the wrong kid, or you can have the right kid in poverty. So you chose the money. I said, I chose survival, Graham yelled. And I gave you a life most people dream of. You went to the best schools. You never worked a day in your life until you wanted to. And you called me the affair child. I said, you made my mother cry for decades. You made me hate myself. Why? Graham. If it was just about the money, why the cruelty? Graham looked away. His jaw worked. Because I had to look at you, he spat. every day. I had to look at you and know that you weren't mine. You were a constant reminder of my cowardice. You were the walking proof that I had sold my soul. So yes, I resented you. I made you small so I didn't have to feel so small myself. Elaine walked into the room. I hadn't heard her enter. She was wearing her nightgown and a robe. She looked like a ghost. She walked over to the desk. She looked at the file. Then she looked at Graham. You weren't a victim. Graham? She said. Her voice was ice. Elaine, please. Graham started. No, she said. You weren't a victim. You were a beneficiary. You chose the money. And then you chose to punish a child for your own greed. She turned to me. I am leaving him. Claire, I should have done it 30 years ago. I stayed because I thought I was protecting you. I thought if I left, he would tell you the truth about the affair and destroy you. But there was no affair. There was just a business deal. She took off her wedding ring. It was a massive diamond, cold and hard. She dropped it on the desk next to the file. It is over. Graham. Graham looked at the ring. Then he looked at me. His eyes were full of hate. Get out of my house, he whispered. Both of you, you are nothing to me. You are a bad investment. I looked at him. I am not an investment. Graham, I am the evidence. I met Lydia the next day. We met at a park halfway between Briar Glen and Dunfield. It was a neutral ground. I showed her the agreement. She read it in silence. So my dad knew. She said, Mark knew. He took the money. I said gently, he signed the agreement. Lydia closed her eyes. He sold me. She whispered, he loved me, but he sold me. We sat on a bench, watching kids play on the swings. The court order came through this morning. I told her. The judge issued a declaration of parentage. It is official. Lydia, legally, I am a Harlan, and you are a ward. Lydia laughed. But there was no humor in it. I don't want to be a ward, she said. I don't want their money. I don't want their name. I like my life. Claire, I like my fiancé. I like my job. I don't want to be the lost princess of Briar Glen. You don't have to be, I said. You can be whoever you want. Lydia looked at me. It is not that simple, she said. Every time I look in the mirror now, I see strangers. I see Elaine's chin. I see Graham's eyes. I feel robbed. I grieve for the life I didn't have. But I also resent you for showing it to me. If you hadn't taken that test, I would still just be Lydia Harlan. Now, I am a tragedy. I am sorry. I said, don't be sorry. She said, just finish it. If we are going to burn it down, make sure there is nothing left. The final step was the hardest. I went back to the Ward estate one last time. I didn't go inside. I stood at the gate. Graham came out to meet me. He looked smaller, deflated. Elaine was gone. The house felt empty even from the driveway. I have the DNA results, I said. The official court admissible ones. 0% match to you. 99.9% match to Mark Harlan. Graham didn't speak. I am not asking for money. I said, I am not asking for back pay on the trust. What do you want? Graham asked. I want a retraction. I said, I want you to write a letter to the family, to the cousins, the aunts, the society friends. I want you to tell them the truth, that there was no affair, that Elaine was faithful, that I was a victim of a hospital error that you covered up. I want you to clear my name, Graham, and I want you to clear Elaine's name. Graham looked at me. He looked at the manicured lawn, the white columns, the symbol of everything he had protected for 30 years. If I do that, he said, I admit to fraud. The trustees will sue me. The hospital insurance will collapse. I will be ruined. You are already ruined, I said. This is your chance to be human. He stared at me for a long time. Then, he shook his head. I can't, he said. The ward name. It is all I have. He turned his back on me and walked toward the house. He chose the lie. Again, he chose the image over the truth, the pride over the repair. I watched him go, and I felt the last tether snap. I didn't hate him anymore. I just pitied him. He was a prisoner of his own architecture. I got in my car. I drove to the local library. Where the internet was public and secure, I met Rowan Pike in the parking lot. "Do you have it?" he asked. I handed him a thick envelope. Inside was the identity continuity agreement, the invoice from Sablegate Consulting, the missing logbook pages, and the declaration of parentage. "It is all there," I said. "The shell company, the cover-up, the payments." Rowan weighed the envelope in his hand. "This is going to destroy them. Claire, the hospital, the estate, everything. I know." I said, "Are you ready for that?" I looked at the sky. It was a clear, sharp blue. I spent 33 years trying to fit into a story that wasn't mine. I said, "I am done with stories. I just want the truth. Run it." The article appeared on Sunday morning. The Stolen Heirs. How Briar Glen's first family bought a bloodline. It was the lead story. It was everywhere. The internet exploded. The comment section was a wildfire of outrage. The fallout was immediate. The hospital released a statement announcing an internal review and the immediate suspension of the legal team involved in the 2004 transfer. It was a hollow gesture. Too little, too late. The lawsuits from the other families, the ones Rowan found, were already being filed. Graham Ward barricaded himself in the estate. The trustees froze the accounts within 24 hours. The Ward legacy, he had sold his soul to protect, was now synonymous with fraud. Elaine moved to a small cottage on the coast. She started painting again. We spoke every day. For the first time. She sounded like a mother, not a frightened girl. Lydia and I met for coffee once a week. It was awkward. We were strangers trying to be sisters. But we were trying. We didn't talk about the past. We talked about the future. And I legally changed my name. I didn't become Claire Harlan, and I wasn't Claire Ward. I was just Claire. I sat on my porch, watching the leaves fall. The silence was different now. It wasn't the silence of secrets. It was the silence of a clean slate. I had lost my family. I had lost my inheritance. I had lost the only identity I had ever known. But as I took a deep breath of the cold November air, I realized something. For the first time in 33 years, the air reached all the way to the bottom of my lungs. I wasn't the affair child. I wasn't the mistake. I was the truth, and that was enough. Thank you so much for listening to Claire's story. It has been a journey through secrets, lies, and the search for identity. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below telling me where you are listening from and what you thought of the ending. Did Graham get what he deserved? If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel Revenge Stories for more narratives about justice, betrayal, and the truth coming to light. I can't wait to share the next one with you.